We aim at presenting a highly diversified program slate for our Sunday night speaker series in order to engage a wide spectrum of our community during this challenging time. And tonight we have the privilege to hear from Mr. Harry Macklowe, a New York City real estate developer and investor and CEO of Macklowe Properties. Mr. Macklowe will be formally introduced by Fifth Avenue Synagogue member Louis Perlman. Louis is someone who is very close to Fifth Avenue Synagogue, and close in this case has multiple levels of meaning. It means close in proximity, as he and his wife Julie live right next door to the synagogue. But it also means close in terms of involvement and support of the synagogue. Louis is a regular attendee at services, and this past year was a difficult year for him, as he recently lost his beloved mother, the matriarch of the family, and he joins us regularly when he's in New York to recite the Kaddish in her memory and to elevate her soul. We hope and pray that he and his family only know of happy occasions and be blessed with strength, comfort, and good health in the years to come. Louis, we want to thank you for arranging tonight's presentation. We also want to thank you for all that you do for our shul and our community. It's greatly appreciated, and we're so fortunate to have you as a member. Louis will introduce Mr. Macklowe, and Jacob Gold will be moderating questions afterwards.
First of all, I'm very happy that I was able to convince Harry to join us this evening to let us have his thoughts on the real estate market in New York. As we all know, we've all been through a very difficult year, and it isn't over yet. And I thought it would be a good idea to have someone with the experience of Harry give us a clearer understanding of how he sees the market at the moment. I can begin by introducing Harry in many different ways, but I will say that there is no one in the real estate market in New York, or for that matter, in this country, who hasn't heard of Harry Macklowe. He is a visionary. He's been in the business for over 60 years. He's been through many ups and downs of the market, and he knows intimately all the various characteristics that make the real estate market in New York. For me, I have shared with Harry both his sailing ability as well as his real estate capability. And I was thinking about some of the qualities that go into making a good sailor and someone who is successful in real estate. And some of the qualities that immediately come to mind is a very good intuition, a clear understanding, a calmness, and a discipline mixed with a lot of experience. He's also something else. He's not simply a developer. He is also, in many ways, an artist. He loves design, he loves architecture, and when you look at the buildings that Harry has been involved with, all of them are iconic in terms of their structure, their aesthetic, and the many components that go into a building. One, I can mention 432 Park Avenue, which is, as we all know, one of the tallest buildings in New York, one of the iconic residential buildings in New York. One can look at the Apple Cube in front of the 59th Street building, 59th and 5th. One can look at the Metropolitan Tower. In all of these, you can see Harry's touch. His touch is a special one that I think is unique to Harry in terms of being a developer in New York. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Harry to you, and I think you're going to have some very interesting comments tonight from him. Thank you, Harry. Jacob, you want to take over with the questions?
Yes.
Louis, there's nothing that is more satisfying than praise. Praise to me is a dividend that's worth so much more than money. So thank you for the introduction. I'm very flattered, and you're very generous with your words. So I don't want to let that moment go unpassed. And you make me feel very good. So you've set me in a wonderful mood. Thank you.
So thank you again, Louis, for making tonight happen. And thank you, Harry, for giving us your time this evening. I have special regards from our honorary chairman, Ira Renard, who sends special regards to you.
Oh,
And
how nice. Thank you. Thank you, Ira. Thank you.
You know, Harry, everyone on the call, I'm sure, knows you, but we're going to jump into some specific questions. And I spoke to Louis for a long time today. But can you tell us, please, a little bit about when you first decided to get into real estate and maybe your early passion? Would you feel comfortable sharing that with us, please?
I came out of the advertising business, which was essentially my first significant office job after college, and I liked the advertising business. I liked the idea of promotion. I liked the idea of marketing. I liked the idea of selling a story, but I felt a limitation in the advertising business when I started in 1959, 1960. It wasn't as open and as non-sectarian as it is today. And while seeking an apartment, I got exposed to the New York real estate market, an industry that I had no idea what it was all about. And I kind of came into the real, but as I thought I was kind of limited. And in the real estate business, I learned it, became a trainee, and practiced a brokerage with a firm that's no longer in business, Julian Studley. It was a very small company, so I could learn everything about real estate from my mentors, including mortgage sales and office leasing. I recognized that the horizons in real estate were limitless. And I became friendly with several owners. I was very successful as a broker, earning a great deal of commissions, but I could see that the idea on the other side of ownership was really where I wanted to be. So I was able to take an interest, which I think at that time was more nascent than it is today, in design and in architecture, and become much more proficient in seeing what I would call seeing around a corner, being able to look and judge what could be, not what was. And I guess that's really one of the great benefits of youth. You have a exposure and a virgin point of view, and there is always what I can do, not what the stumbling blocks are. Actually, after I've built a building, it's complete and it's rented or sold, I always look back and say, my God, that was it. It seemed to me so easy to do, but now when I look at it, in retrospect, it's a formidable task. So you have the opportunity in real estate to have a limitless horizon. And then once you've completed the task. And once you've completed the building, it's kind of a letdown, and you look back and say, that was pretty difficult. So it's really interesting. Nothing in our business is very easy. And especially today, we're confronted with many, many challenges. But that's a little bit of an overview. Please feel free to ask me questions and we can move from there.
Okay, great. I mean, it seems like, not seems like, you're self-made. You built it all yourself and on your own. And I think as we talk further, you put your money where your mouth is. You've put a lot of cash of your own. It's not other people's money, but your money. And you've done a lot of personal guarantees that explain your success and how you've been able to do so much in your career. But I wanted to know if you could talk about luxury versus regular, because I know you work well with architects, and if you could maybe tell us, for those of us on the call, the difference between luxury and regular. How would you explain that difference?
Well, first of all, my interest has always been the preference to investments has always been on the commercial, on the office building side. I find office buildings very challenging, of course. I find working with companies and working with the real estate leasing community very satisfying. And I find that the creation of an office building and the, I guess, finding homes for office tenants, I think that acknowledgement of success is something that I find very, very satisfying. The office building is a very difficult task to build an office building, to get the zoning, assemble the site, to get the permission from the city, and then to build it and build it in a budget, and then to rent it to find a acceptable and suitable market is always enormously satisfying. And I've been in the business for 6 decades. I've seen the 20th and 21st century. I've been a participant of it, and I think I'm very proud to say I've left a indelible mark on New York City. I think the buildings that I've built, at least a half a dozen, have been outstanding and will be highly regarded architecturally for many, many years to come. And that's, to me, very, very satisfying. When I said that the praise was a dividend, it certainly is. I love the real estate business, and my first interest is building office buildings. My second interest is building residential buildings, rental and or ownership condominiums. And I always like to think that the buildings themselves are special. It has certainly a great deal of my thinking in them. It has a great deal of my personality, and it certainly has a great deal of my passion. The office buildings with the advanced mechanical systems and with the designs are, I think, have always been very forward thinking. I've tried to employ the same feeling for my residence buildings, and I've tried to employ in residence some of the artifices that I use in commercial buildings. I really like to have doors that are floor to ceiling. I like to have a feeling of the visual datum within the apartment houses, which is calm and gives a very restful and tranquil feeling about the spaces that I've created. I kind of architecturally very much enjoy working off of center lines, because I think architecturally that keeps everything in balance. that's rooms, spaces created, and the visual effect from the outside and from the inside. So there's always something in my mind that I'm trying to achieve architecturally, be it condominium, rental, residential rental, or office space. The market over the past 10 years has been so intoxicating with condominiums that has pretty much made it impossible to build a rental building. Now, I think with the COVID and with the I guess the real estate market having gone down so much because of the virus, I think that we are probably going to be able to create some more rental housing. It may take another 6 months or so to shake out in the market, but I think that land prices will go down and there will be an opportunity to build housing that you can keep in your portfolio. It's very difficult to build pre-March, pre-COVID. It was impossible to find any site for development for rental other than Brooklyn and Queens. So Manhattan, I think, will probably have a realignment and a new price structure, which will allow for the creation of rental housing.
Okay, great. So tell us about the creativity side of it. Is it through traveling that you see things, or when do you come up with these brilliant ideas? For example, the General Motors building, what you built with Apple, is extraordinary. I think you took basement space and made it phenomenal. So tell us about some of those creative ideas, when they come, how they come, if you can, please.
Well, I think that I've always admired, at first, taking a building, an office building or an apartment house, and reshaping it, or what we would call repositioning it. As an investor, my first thing and upgrading it. My second investment was buying a hotel, to be confused with the Concord and Kiamish Lake, upstate New York, but this was on 40th Street and Lexington Avenue, and converting that to vacating it, stripping it down, and converting that to a office building on 40th and Lexington Avenue. My next investment was over at 2nd Avenue between 46th and 47th Street, and that obviously was a office building development site for me that I thought should be geared to the United Nations. And I wanted to create a building that was small, but had the same architectural distinction and lines as the Seagram building. So I studied the Seagram building very carefully. And when I selected an architect, I made that an essential part of the program. And as I made that a part of the program, I found myself drawing with the architect and describing in 3D what I thought the design should be. And I recognized that my ideas were very valid. I recognized that I was able to draw very well. And we worked together seamlessly, doing soft line drawings, asymmetric drawings, and exploring all of the architectural ideas that I had. So it was very interesting that we had this collegial relationship. The first architect that I worked with after working with space designers as a leasing broker, the first architect his name was Ladislav Rado, and the firm was Raymond and Rado. And Raymond had gone to Japan and worked very closely with Frank Lloyd Wright on the Frank Lloyd Wright Hotel in Tokyo. Les Rado was a very fine architect. He was from Czechoslovakia and had a very good collegial relationship. We were able to draw together, explore ideas together, have social moments together. Our architects were always extremely pleasing and very, very tolerant, especially if you are kind of discussing with them architecture more on a pure level. So we were able to come up with essentially a replication of the Seagram building. And I noticed that the building on 46th and 47th Street that 47th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue was a two-way street. It's the only block in Manhattan that is a two-way street. And it was two ways because Zeckendorf, when he did the assemblage under the tutelage of Governor Nelson Rockefeller to create the site for the United Nations building, Zeckendorf and Harrison and Abramovich felt that the entrance to the United Nations should be on 47th Street. So they condemned the buildings on the south, a entry to the United Nations. But when the mayors and Harrison and Abramovich planned the General Assembly building, they reconsidered and they thought the entrance should be off 42nd Street because 42nd Street's a major boulevard, and between 1st and 2nd Avenue and the East River Drive, it kind of framed the entrance to the General Assembly building. So they were left with 47th Street, the south side, and they made it into a cobblestone park. I went to the then Commissioner of Parks, August Heckscher, and I said, I would like to take the 2nd Avenue frontage of the park and incorporate it into my office building. And I would like to create a platform for the exhibition of monumental sculpture. And I would like to call my building 2 Hammershot Plaza after Dag Hammarskjöld, the then deceased leader of the United Nations. Heckscher was all in favor of it, and I was able to annex the park and incorporate it into my office building. And I was able to get the city council to approve officially the name of the building rather than calling it simply 866 2nd Avenue. The numerical address was able to get it to be called 2 Hammershot Plaza. So that's how I created an atmosphere of one architecture, a small with a beautiful plaza, a recreation of a name, and the building of a very, very dignified, rather beautiful office building on the block front from 46th to 47th Street. So that was my first new office building. It was my first all new building. And I was excited about it and completely besotted with the idea of building new buildings. I loved it. I found it stimulating, and it gave me an opportunity to exercise all of my architectural fantasies, and lots of dreams became reality from that. I also remember working with Alexander Lieberman, who was at that time the editorial director of Condé Nast, and he was also a sculptor. Alex was a very multifaceted, brilliant man. He was married to Tatiana. They were both Jewish Russian emigres who escaped from Russia, escaped from Germany, and came to the United States. Alex had the complete confidence of Cy Newhouse, who was head of all the Newhouse publications, and he became the editorial director of all the magazines that Condé Nast published.
Wow.
So he was my first sculpture exhibition when I opened to Hammershot Plaza in 1967.
Wow. So one thing, it seems like, tell me if I'm wrong, but when you bought the General Motors building, you cultivated a relationship with Steve Jobs. And I think it's quite unusual because you're great at working with architects, but you also seem to have a way of working with the right tenants, let's say. So can you tell us about Steve Jobs and how that relationship evolved?
Well, a good realtor is like a dog with a bone. He won't let go. And if he has or she an idea and they believe in it fervently, then I guess that's out of Shakespeare, to thine own self be true, and stay with it. Often people ask me, what advice do you have to give to somebody who wants to start in the business? And I say, well, just have the conviction and the determination to stay with your ideas if you really think they are correct. So have enough confidence in your own self and don't let somebody talk you out of it, because it's very easy to be a negative critic. It's very difficult to be a positive endorser of somebody else's ideas. And people often look for why a deal doesn't work. It's really the entrepreneur, it's the builder or developer who looks for why the deal will work. And often that's done in the face of tremendous opposition. So it really requires a great deal of confidence and determination. With Steve Jobs, it was very, very interesting. Steve Jobs was looking for a location in Soho for the first Apple store. Steve Jobs had worked for 3 or 4 years with his team to create the ideal store for Apple. Steve Jobs believed that he would be able to control both the manufacturing and the sale of the Apple products, much as Elon Musk believes that he will control and should control the creation, the manufacturing, and the sale of the Tesla automobile. With Elon Musk, it's very difficult because the government doesn't allow an automobile manufacturer to have more than 2 showrooms in any state. So it's extremely difficult for Tesla to have, as General Motors or Ford has lots of automobile showrooms, but they do it through dealers. But Tesla wants to be able to control the presentation and the marketing of their product, as Steve Jobs wanted to control the presentation of the full Apple line. And you can tell from the unique design of the Apple products, which was Steve Jobs' interest in creating an unusual product with the head of his design team, Mr. Ives. So you can see that he wanted to create stores, and each store that he has created around the world is the same. And it took him 4 years to perfect that store. The first store that he created was outside of Bethesda, Maryland, and he had built like 10 stores in the parking lot in Cupertino until he got it just right. Then he market tested it in Bethesda. And I knew that he was looking for a location in Soho, and I was building a building at the end of NYU, at the beginning of Soho on Broadway and Houston Street. What was a car wash, what was called there was a wonderful man who owned the land. His name is Reuben Steinfeld. And Reuben was a Russian emigre who came to this country and developed gas stations and automobile washing stores. And he had created this car wash on Houston Street and Broadway, where most of the taxis went. And he offered it for lease. I grabbed the property because I thought it was a very prominent location. And I created 610 Broadway, a very, very beautiful building, which architecturally took its design from the curve of Houston Street, because Houston Street, when you're going from east to west, has a bit of a graceful curve to it. And that's what my office building did. And I felt it was the perfect location for Apple and the store. But Steve Jobs had looked at a location on Broome Street, on Prince and Worcester. What was an old post office. It had a glass atrium for a roof. And I think he was really interested in that. I tried to talk them out of it. I spoke to the head of real estate, who I had known because I had rented several Gap locations to him. And I was friendly with the owner of Gap. So I had a very good relationship with Gap. And he had gone from Gap to Apple and was doing their locations. And I could not convince him to get Steve Jobs to change the location. So I tried reaching out to Steve Jobs. I had a very difficult time getting through. And then the head of Apple real estate told me they were going to go ahead with their alternate location. And at that same time, I was bidding to buy the General Motors building. And I said, I understand you guys are also going to be looking for a Fifth Avenue location. I want to show you something that will be absolutely different and splendid. And I showed him the basement space, the concourse space of General Motors. Trump owned the building at the time. And I thought this was a sensational location for them. He submitted that. He submitted it to Steve Jobs. I was able to get through to Steve Jobs. And, so when I got to Cupertino, I made a presentation to him. He made a presentation to me. And we shook hands in a half an hour. It was very interesting. They picked me up. I flew out privately. They picked me up at the airport in a truck, in an open truck. And I remember riding to the Apple campus in an open truck. I thought, oh my God, if that's how I'm going to be treated, I wonder what's going to be for lunch. I'm sure it's going to be the Sabrat hot dog stand. But we got along sensationally, and it only took a half an hour for me to trade ideas with him, for him to trade ideas with me. And I had 500 different designs for the plaza at Fifth Avenue. I felt it should be an entirely different presentation, and it should be one tenant. And we agreed instantly on both the design, on my plan, his plan, and it was sensational. Interestingly enough, the Apple Cube, we with his real estate committee, we had a little bit of a difference on rental. And I wanted a rent of $3.5 million. They would not budge above $2.5 million. And we finally struck a deal where I said, if you guys can't come to meet my rental, what I'd rather do is have a percentage rental. And they said, well, would you accept 3.5%? And I said, well, let me hear how the sales are broken down between students and non-students, between nonprofit and profit. And they gave me what their history was. And I said, yes, I'd accept 3.5%. I said, if you'll give me a minimum guarantee of $2.5 million, I'll accept the 3.5%. So I did that, and that turned out to be pretty good, because in the last year of my ownership of the General Motors building, the gross $800 million. So 3.5% of that rental was in excess of $24 million. So of course they far exceeded the guarantee, and I guess my rental income was considerably greater, and it of course enhanced the value of the General Motors building, which I bought for $1.4 billion. So oftentimes God takes care of little children and drunks. So I guess I was taken care of as a child, viewed by God as a child. So I kind of backed into that one.
Thank you for sharing that. So can we talk a little bit about 432 Park Avenue, which is such a gorgeous building? I remember when the Drake Hotel was there. I'm just curious how long that took you to put that together. And I'm sure you're happy with the results, but if you could tell us your perspective.
Well, I think every building that I've built has a story and has a reason behind it that is not obvious. When I was in the advertising business, my office was on Madison Avenue on the east side of Madison Avenue between 56th and 57th Street. 57th Street, and this is going back to 1959, 1960, from Park Avenue to 6th Avenue, had art galleries on the street. And most of the buildings were small. Most of them were 20 or 15 or 25 footer townhouses, right up to Tiffany on the south side of 57th Street. And on the north side between 5th and Madison Avenue, there were very small buildings. Only one high-rise building on 5th Avenue and one high-rise building on Madison and 57th Street on the north side of between 5th and Madison. Everything else was small buildings. And my office building was 56th and 57th Street. And I always noticed the small townhouses on the south side of 57th Street between Madison and Park Avenue. I always thought that that was a underuse of space. And when I had an opportunity to buy the Drake Hotel, which had 275 feet on 56th Street, I felt that the building would be greatly enhanced if it had frontage on 57th Street and if it were known as its Park Avenue address or its 57th Street address. It would have far more prestige, far more dignity. And of course, I remember being totally besotted with the idea of the small townhouses on 57th Street. So as soon as I signed a contract to buy the Drake Hotel, I first of all assured the owner of the Marriott, which owned the Drake Hotel, that I was closing the deal, and we became friendly. His name was Nick Narcetta. And then I went to acquire all the buildings I could on 57th Street. Some of the air rights had been sold to the Drake, but some of the buildings were very much available, and it was difficult to complete the assemblage, but I was able to buy 6 of the buildings on the south side of 57th Street. And I was able to create a presence of 432 Park Avenue on 57th Street. And I was able to, I think, create a dignity and a presence that if the building were on 56th Street, 432 would not be as glamorous or as architecturally interesting. Because what I did with Raphael Vignoli, who was the project design architect, a friend of mine for many years, and we were able to sit and draw together, which was a requirement in hiring an architect that he would have as a co-designer, Macklowe. I was able to create and put the tower of 57th Street in the center of the block. The block is 200 feet. So I was able to put my 90-foot structure exactly in the center of the block. And that's what makes the building so majestic. And if I had not bought the townhouses on 57th Street, I would not have been able to do that. I would not have been able to create the architecturally splendid building that I've created. And I feel enormously proud of 432 architecturally, because it's certainly very distinguished, because both the public, my friends, my peers in the business feel it's a very good design and they compliment me on it. The architects in the community that I'm involved with, both in Europe, the architects in Europe that I'm very friendly with, the Renzo Pianos, with the John Pawsons, the whole group of other Norman Foster, other architects that I've worked with, are very complimentary about the design of the building. And architects are very wonderful bunch. They're like directors in Hollywood. You're only as good as your last movie. And the architects have been to without a fault, very complimentary. They understand my interest in architecture and design, the creations that I've been able to accomplish. And they are all extremely complimentary on 432, which to me is, again, so flattering and so satisfying, considerably more so than any financial achievement that I'm able to arrive at. Money is money, but the stamp that I've left behind is something that I find enormously satisfying. And when somebody, I was having a discussion, I was invited to talk at the Louis, what's the club on 60th Street? Not the Lotus Club, the
Carlton?
Harmony.
Yes.
The Harmony Club.
Harmony Club.
I was invited to talk at the Harmony Club about 432, and somebody in the audience asked me, "Do you have any regrets?" And I said, and I'm happy to say again, because I really feel it, the only regret that I have at 432 is that my parents are not alive for them to see that their son built a building that was taller than the Empire State Building. And I say that because I would imagine that most of the people here who are listening to this podcast, this program, were taken on a certain rite of passage to the Empire State Building, as was I when I was 8, 10, or 12 years old with my brother, with my cousin. We were a very close family. And taken to the top of the Empire State Building. And when I was there, New York City was a much lower city, and the Empire State Building, of course, in the eyes of a 10 or a 12-year-old, was as enormous as could be. There's never been a building taller than that. And with my wide eyes, I was able to look around from the observation tower and be totally overwhelmed. Of course, my wife is French, and I go to the top of the Eiffel Tower, and I see how it looks over Paris and how overwhelming it is, even though it's considerably smaller, almost half the size of 432 Park Avenue. So my regret is that my parents are not there. Perhaps they are looking at it, and I don't know it. But it gives me a great deal of pride that I was able to accomplish that. And I'm very fortunate because 432 is all by itself on the east side. And I'm not next to the tall buildings on Central Park South. So from the airport and from Brooklyn and from the Long Island Expressway and from the New England Thruway and from the Tappan Zee Bridge, I can see 432 Park Avenue. I don't need binoculars. And it stands very proud by itself, and it gives me a tremendous feeling of pride and accomplishment that is considerably greater than any financial rewards I might have been able to enjoy.
Thank you for sharing that. Can you tell us a little bit about your most recent project, I think on Wall Street? Has that been completed or is about to be completed? Downtown?
When I can tell you about that, but as I said, each story has each building has a story, and people ask me, which is your favorite building? And it's, well, my favorite building is always my last building, I think, because it has so much of me in it. When I worked for the advertising agency, the bank on the ground floor of the office building that I worked in had the Irving Trust was the bank, was the tenant on the ground floor. So of course I opened an account, Irving Trust, and that became as a young man, that became the first bank that I had a checking account, had a savings account. And when I went into business for myself, after I left the brokerage, and I went to a bank to borrow money to put into my first deal and my first business plan. I went back to the Irving Trust, and the loan officer on the floor made an introduction for me to go to the headquarters building, which was 1 Wall Street, which was at the corner of Wall Street and Broadway, across from Trinity Church. And the Irving Trust was ultimately sold and merged with the Bank of New York. And I was able to buy from the Bank of New York 1 Wall Street, which was very interesting because that's my first bank. And now, many years later, I'm buying their headquarters building, which was landmarked and designed by Mr. Walker, who was highly regarded at that time. The building was landmarked. It was built in 1928. and it went from Wall Street from Wall Street to Exchange Place. An annex was built in 1960, but the original structure in 1928, One Wall Street, was landmarked. So I now own a landmark building with an annex, and the building has about 1,250,000 feet in it. And we are renovating that building into both commercial. We've rented to Whole Foods and Lifetime Fitness, and we are bringing a department store from Paris to Wall Street, and we're creating a 600 unit or 555 or 56 unit condominium at Wall Street and Broadway. And the building will be spectacular. It's the largest conversion, alteration of its type. It's in excess of a $2 billion transaction, and it will open at the end of the year. We will start marketing the building in May or in June. And it's a very exciting building for downtown. And after 9/11, downtown below Canal Street changed dramatically. So there is a population, a residential population south of Canal Street, which is in excess of 150,000 people. This building will have about 550, as I said, condominiums. It will have in excess of 300,000 feet of commercial space, and will be a spectacular building, and will be, I think, an outstanding landmark, and as important to downtown as I think the three important residential buildings: Uptown, 15 Central Park West, 220 Central Park South, and 432, I think, are the outstanding architectural achievements in condominiums Midtown. And I think that One Wall Street will have a significant following and architecturally be spectacular, together with 80 Spruce Street, which was designed by Frank Gehry, and together with Larry Silverstein's creation of the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown. So I think will be very highly thought of and architecturally distinguished, both for the readaptation of a landmark building and the compatibility that we have created with enlarging the annex building and the creation of the city landscape, streetscape that we have done when the building is revealed in June of this year. So I'm very excited about it. Somebody asks, which are your favorite children? There are no favorite children. It's always the children that are special. And you've never heard a parent say their child is not the brightest and the prettiest and the best. So I think that One Wall Street will be the prettiest, the brightest, and the best. But I think all of my buildings, with the point of view and the architectural artifice that we bring to it, the new kind of point of view that we have, makes them each distinguished and outstanding.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Louis, is there something you wanted to cover tonight with Harry that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to get Harry's views about how he sees the market evolving over the next couple of years, both on the office side and on the residential side.
Louis, New York City is up until February, has been a great city. It's been really a capital city of the United States financially. It's been a capital city for the commercial environment. It's been really a citadel of the money center. And really, if you ask yourself, makes a city great? What makes Paris great? What makes London, Rome, Chicago, Los Angeles, Washington, New York City? There's so much make them outstanding. And we know that New York City and all of the urban complexes that I mentioned, all of the real metropolitan areas of those countries, those cities that are created, are unique to themselves because of the outstanding aspects of those cities. France is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. London follows shortly behind it. New York City, with its museums, with its theaters, with its restaurant, with its culture, with its hospitals, with the in-depth office buildings, with the spectacular apartment houses, with the transportation cities, that is great. All of that has been put on pause, not only in New York City, but throughout the major capitals of the world, because of the pandemic and because of what we're looking at from March on. And we now wait for the city to restore itself, to rebuild itself. We now wait, and we understand, because of our technology and because of Steve Jobs and the creation of the Apple phone and creation, we don't have to be in the center of the city in order to work. We can do it remotely. And that's changed since February. And the remote offices are something that we found we can live with now. It will be close to a year, 2 months hence. And the office buildings in the cities are sparsely occupied, but they will come back. And the dramatic drop in the price of land will be digested by our real estate community, and the change that will overcome and has the cities will ultimately be restored. And I think it will take probably 36 months for us to go back to how the cities were treated in February pre-COVID of 2020. So I believe strongly that the best locations and the most luxurious buildings will stay as luxurious. I believe that the creation of the new buildings in the very best locations will be successful, because the best locations are always the best locations. That's office buildings and apartment houses. I think that the creation of Hudson Yards will continue to attract tenancy, and it will take a while, but it will continue to be successful because Related has put its stamp on the office buildings, and the condominiums that are being built around it will find a market. I think the buildings that are being built, well located as far as condominiums on the east side, will take longer to fill up, but the best locations will be the ones that attract the interest of buyers, and I think that they will be successful. I think the buildings on the tertiary, which were started in a time where it was no location was a barrier, will suffer, and it will take a long time for those to be absorbed. And I think that they will probably be sold at cost, sometimes below cost. I think there will be quite a while before all of the product is absorbed into the financial system. But I am a strong believer of the best locations and the best buildings, and we, my company and my colleagues in the business, are trying to buy things that are broken. We're looking at what we can supply with our ready and patient capital, and we're looking at others who may have gotten into trouble and coming in to either rescue or buy or work with institutions who may need help, and see our degree of expertise as supplying a help in an area where they need assistance, and they can look at a track record and see if we can make a contribution.
So, Harry, I was thinking of another question. You've been in the real estate business in so many different pockets for so many decades. What would you say is the most positive change over the last 3 decades? And what would you say is something, in your perspective, that's not so positive?
Well, I think that on the creation of the office buildings and apartment houses, residences that our community is involved with, I think the most positive aspect is the technological advances that we have made architecturally and mechanically. So I'm not saying that that means our architecture is distinguished or it's pedestrian. Quite to the contrary. What I'm saying is the way we build now has changed dramatically since I started in the business many decades ago. Many decades ago, we were limited in the height of buildings to the height of cranes. Now our technology has advanced so much that we have a new science in pouring concrete. We have a new science in engineering our buildings. We can build tall buildings. We have a whole new science architecturally in the products that we use. The finishes that we use the same marble, but we're able to cut it into 1/8 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch or 1.5 inches. We're able to put marble on plywood. We're able to put it on foam core. We're able to trick nature by using stone and backing it differently and saving weight, and using technological advances in product design just as much as both refrigeration, washing of dishes. The appliance industry has changed, and it's given us a whole panoply of new products to work with and give us the opportunity of creating luxurious surroundings and contents for the apartment houses we build, mechanical systems for our office buildings that heretofore were never available. It allows us to constantly change air 24 hours a day in our office buildings and our apartment houses. It's given us the benefit of both mechanical engineering, structural engineering, architectural fantasies that we now can create and work with, and we're only limited by the fecundity and the fertility of our imagination. And those advances have allowed us to accomplish architecture that is outstanding, that allows Frank Gehry to create his buildings, which he draws by pencil in the air, and allows us to build buildings which heretofore we never could build, using ratios of 16 or 18 or 21 times each horizontal foot to a vertical foot. So the buildings that we're able to build here around the world, in Asia, are spectacular. And it allows us to absolutely work with dreams of what it is that you could create, and to admire other architects for the designs that they're able to evolve and the changing of the envelope. So residents started in a cave, and look at where we're able to go. We're able to build a building that's a quarter of a mile high, a half a mile high. This is spectacular. So those changes, which are now fundamental in our business, are things that I find spectacular. And it gives us a lump of clay to work with, which is a considerable move forward from the caveman and from the early dwelling and the shelter that we have come from. So I would find that to be the most spectacular. And the first apartment house that I built was River Tower. What was interesting about that apartment house is that New York City has a pronounced grid. It's really a city that goes from right to left. It's horizontal, it's perpendicular, and it works off a rectangle. I was able to create a building which cut across the site and which turned its back on rectilinearity and violated the grid. I was able to take a building because the site was large enough, and I felt that by placing the building perpendicular, I was able to get more windows that looked at the East River. I was able to get more views of the city skyline, and I was able to create a different building. I built that building in 1978. It was remarkable. It had an 8'4" ceiling. Nobody had built an apartment house that exceeded an 8-foot ceiling. And I was able to employ office building design to it. I made all of my closet doors, all of my entry doors, floor to ceiling, not 7 feet, which is what Lefrak City was built, Parker City was built, what everybody built their apartment houses, 7-foot door. I was able to go to the ceiling because I thought that raised the space and it gave a new visual datum that created a certain tranquility, and I've always been faithful to that. 432 Park Avenue, the ceiling heights are 16 feet from floor to underneath of slab. And I dropped the finished ceiling down to 12.5 feet. But think about that, from 1978 to 2016, during that period of time, I doubled the height. I was the first person in New York City to double the height of an apartment house from 8 to 16 feet and dropping it down to 12 feet. I built Metropolitan Tower, 432 Park Avenue, overpowers Metropolitan Tower, which was, when I built it in 1986, was the 8th tallest concrete structure in the world. I was the first person who used a four-sided silicone facade And Metropolitan Tower stood proudly by itself with its advanced architectural V-shaped tower. And I was able to look at it and photograph it and see how it stood so proud. And I photographed it from the sheep meadow. And it was the first four-sided silicone building, all glass facade with no aluminum on the exterior. It was all glazed with silicone adhered glass to the structure. And I remember an engineer, a facade expert, Norman Smith, saying, I would never build that building. There's no aging, there's no testing. How do you know it's going to be okay? How do you know the facade's not going to fall off? Well, I went to North Miami. I went to the Sagnowski testing laboratory, and we blew out the exterior of the building. It took 150-mile-an-hour winds, and the glass never came off the facade. The aluminum cavitated and broke and bent, and the glass stayed on. A great tribute to General Electric, who created the silicone, and a great tribute to the engineering at the time. So that's an example of both building products. It's an example of what I'm interested in, both architecturally and as a builder, a developer. I look to both product development. I look to the ideas that to me are in my mind. And if I can develop them, I don't feel there are any boundaries. And I feel very good about that.
So that's a huge positive. Is there anything that you'd like to see changed that's developed maybe that you're not happy about?
I think the public process in the city is one that's tortured. It adds to the cost of development. It holds back the development of the city. I think that the Uniform Land Review process, which is referred to as ULURP, is one that should be streamlined. I think that there should be a much shorter process. I think that the City Planning Commission should have much more authority. I think that the City Council should have less overview. And I think that the city would benefit, recognizing that 65% of the tax base that runs New York City, that runs the 5 boroughs, comes from the real estate community. The real estate community should be encouraged to create and in creating, develop a tax base which will benefit the city. I think the city is in for a very difficult time because of the pandemic, because of people leaving the city, because of the vacancies that has been created. I think the tax base is going to go down. I think the city will be imperiled by its lack of revenue, and the budgets will be cut. Social services will suffer. And I think that the creation of new buildings should be encouraged, and the process that I offered should be very seriously considered. I know it's political anathema on the part of any of the politicians, but when you have no revenue, you're going to look at where can we get money, and taxing the wealthy is not the answer, because there are not that many wealthy people, even though New York City has a very high standard of living. We don't want to scare people away, and we have to create a stronger tax revenue base. And the only way to do that is by encouraging development.
Thank
There
you.
you go.
Are there any politicians that are listening to you? Because I agree with everything you said wholeheartedly, but you feel that there are smart enough people out there to take your advice, or we're still not there yet?
Well, I think we've seen that professional politicians have a tremendous value, and people who pretend to be politicians perhaps suffer because they really don't understand the system, and that's not terribly good. Um, Politicians are politicians. Um, I think you have to have a very broad point of view. I think that one of the best politicians who was in his absolute glory and his moment was not political, and he was only worked and based on meritocracy, and that was Michael Bloomberg. He enjoyed, as the city did, 12 years of prosperity, 12 years of wonderful ideas, 12 years that as a politician and as a leader, he was not political. He made his decisions based on merit. He made them based on what is the best for the city. He didn't have to pander. He was able to make his decisions righteously and without concerning any constituency. So that would be wonderful if we could have that. I'm afraid we cannot. And I respect the politicians for how much they contribute. If they were less interested in power and more interested in merit, I would be a great supporter of whomever that was.
Appreciate it. So Harry, I feel like we accomplished a lot tonight. You've shared a lot about your passion and your accomplishments that are monumental. And on behalf of the synagogue, we wanted to thank you for your time this evening. I hope post-COVID, we can invite you to the synagogue to actually do something more in person.
Well, if I were invited to the synagogue, I'd probably want to tell you about the rabbi who had was about to officiate at the wedding of the Goldbergs to be. And Janet Silverstein was getting married to Michael Goldberg, and the rabbi sat in his office for an hour and a half and spoke to him about the religious ceremony, the service, the meaning of this holy sanctimony. And at the end of the hour and a half, the rabbi said to Mr. Goldberg, "So, do you have any questions?" And Goldberg said, "Well, no, thank you, Rabbi. But actually, there is one question." And he said, "So, go ahead and ask." He said, "Well, at our wedding, I've noticed that the men sit with the men and the women sit with the women, but I'd like to be able to dance with my wife. It's my wedding, and this is extremely important to me." He said, "Dance with your wife at the wedding?" He said, "I couldn't officiate. Frankly, God, I think, would frown on this, and I don't know that this marriage could be successful." He said, "Well, I'm sorry, Rabbi. I'm sorry." He said, "But is it possible," just one more question, so ask, "is it possible that after the wedding, we could have sex?" He said, "Could have sex? You're asking me if you could have sex? Sex is wonderful. Sex leads to children. Of course you could have sex." He says, well, Rabbi, I have one more question. So go ahead and ask. Could we have sex on a hot rubber blanket with chains and pornographic toys and olive oil and whipped cream? He said, whipped cream, whipped cream, whatever you want, you can do whatever you want. He said, well, can we have sex standing up? He said, absolutely not. It could lead to dancing.
And so we actually have a new members dinner every year, and we bring in a comedian. So
Oh, well, okay. So I'm available Thursday nights.
I didn't know that part of your personality, Harry.
Oh, well, anyhow.
Louis, thank you so much for making tonight happen. You know, it was a tough day. We lost one of our members, Michael Friedman, passed away. So it was just a really challenging day. And Harry brought some positiveness in a challenging day. So I really want to thank you again on behalf of the synagogue, and on what you do for New York City is amazing. And I think you gave people a lot of enthusiasm about the future. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you, Harry.
Louis, it's Louis.
Yes.
It's wonderful, and I'm terribly sorry. I'm really sorry because I knew your mother, and of course I loved her, and she was a beacon to me and to Patricia. How old was she?
97.
Can I know that 97?
No. Well,
Harry, you still have a few years to go.
I do, and Patricia's mother is fighting right up there at 95, rounding the corner to 96. So
Thank you.
Okay,
it's good.
thank you
It's
so
good
much.
seeing you.
Thank
Love to
you.
Julie. Goodbye. I'm leaving the meeting.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
My pleasure.